Episode 1. The First Sacrament. You don't remember how you arrived. No one does. But you remember the chapel, and the silence before your name was taken. Leora knew something was wrong the moment her roommate forgot her own name. It happened at breakfast. A simple question. What's the last thing you remember before coming here? Evie blinked, then smiled. I don't know. St. Arabelle School for Girls was beautiful in a way that made your bones ache. Gothic arches, sunlight stained red through glass, air that smelled like dried flowers and old pages, and always the chapel at the center, tall, locked, breathing. Every girl entered it during her first week. No one talked about what happened inside. They only called it the First Sacrament. Leora was summoned on the sixth morning, a silver envelope under her pillow. No stamp, no seal. Only her name, written in a language she didn't recognize, but understood. She followed the bell into the heart of the chapel. It was colder inside than outside. Rows of candles lined the pews, but none were lit. At the altar stood Sister Marin, the ritual mother. Her veil touched the floor. Her hands were red. Kneel! Leora did. She felt the floor pulse beneath her. Stone? Or something buried beneath it? Sister Marin placed a chalice before her. Inside, not wine, not water, milk, laced with ash. Still warm. Drink, then forget. Leora stared at the chalice. What will I forget? Sister Marin smiled. Not kind, not cruel, just old. Whatever hurt enough to bring you here. Leora drank. It tasted like roses burned too slowly, like sugar left to rot. And then, nothing. Not darkness. Not pain. Just light. It filled her mouth, her eyes, her veins, until her own name felt like something borrowed. When she opened her eyes, she was alone. The chalice gone. The chapel empty. And on her palm, a mark had bloomed. Red triangle pointed down. An inverted triangle. Still bleeding. That night, Leora stood in front of her mirror. She tried to remember her mother's voice. A street, a room, her favorite color. Nothing came. But when she turned to leave, the mirror whispered, "You didn't forget. You were erased." Episode 2. The Chapel That Breathes. Some places don't hold silence. They inhale it, and when they exhale, they whisper your name like a memory you didn't give them. Leora wasn't supposed to return. After the first sacrament, students were forbidden from entering the chapel alone. But something had changed. She felt it in her skin, in the way the air around the stone walls seemed to pull at her clothes, as if the chapel missed her, or needed her back. It was just past midnight when she stepped outside. The other girls slept with their hands folded over their hearts, like saints painted in oil and dust. The corridors moaned as she passed. Floorboards bent like ribs under her feet. The chapel doors, sealed with black and wax, were already open. The moment she stepped inside, the air shifted. It wasn't cold. It was alive, breathing, not loud, but rhythmic, as if the walls themselves had lungs, as if the ceiling remembered hymns never written down. Leora crept down the aisle. The candles were still unlit, but there was light. It came from the altar, a faint glow pulsing, like a heartbeat made of milk and ash. She climbed the steps, drawn by instinct, not courage. And then, a sound. Leora, soft, from behind the altar, but not her name as she remembered it. This version was older, heavier, spoken as if by someone who had known her before she was born. She froze. The mark on her palm, red triangle pointed down, began to itch, then burn, then bleed. She stepped behind the altar and found the floor was no longer stone. It was flesh, warm, smooth, slightly pulsing, and carved into it, written in thousands of tiny letters. Every name must return. Then a breath from below, not wind, something deeper, as if the chapel were sighing in relief to have her back. And then another whisper, this time from beneath the floor. Why did you leave? Leora fell to her knees, shaking, and whispered back, I don't remember. A pause. Then the answer, coiling up her spine. Good. That means the sacrament worked. Suddenly, a gust. The candles all lit at once, with no fire. The altar cracked, and something beneath it shifted. She stumbled out of the chapel, the door slamming shut behind her, and carved into the wood, in letters still smoking. You drank, but you did not forget. You owe us a memory. Episode 3. The Girls Who Sleep Standing Up. At St. Arabelle's, silence is not just a rule. It's a posture, and some girls carry it into their sleep, with their eyes open, their prayers backwards, and their feet no longer touching the floor. Leora first noticed it on the 4th night. Her new roommate, Cressida, hadn't spoken since the sacrament. Not once. She did everything right. Brushed her hair, folded her blankets, recited grace before dinner. But she never blinked, and she never lay down. That night, Leora woke to a sound like chalk scraping wood. She turned. Cressida was no longer in bed. She stood by the window, barefoot, eyes open wide, facing the dark forest beyond the glass. Mouth moving. No sound. Leora listened harder, and heard the words, not aloud, but inside her own skull. Ego sum vas, ego sum templum, ego sum memoria tua. I am the vessel. I am the temple. I am your memory. She sat up in bed, trembling. Cressida turned, but only slightly, as if something behind her had called, not Leora, and on her forehead, written in ash, red triangle pointed down, the same inverted mark Leora had seen on her own palm, only now it glowed. In the morning, Cressida was asleep in her bed again, smiling. When Leora asked her what she dreamt about, she simply said, I never dream. It's not allowed once you've been filled. Later that day, during candle duty in the chapel, Leora passed the hall of the unnamed, a corridor lined with stained glass figures without faces. Girls, dozens of them. Every window had the same Latin phrase burned at the bottom, Surgin orando. They rise by praying. That night, Leora crept from her bed again. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find, only that the chapel had begun to feel like it was waiting. She entered the dormitory hallway and froze. Half the girls were no longer in bed. They were standing, each one in a different position. One in the corner, head tilted back. One at the foot of another's bed, whispering into the sheets. One standing atop her own pillow, not sinking in. Their eyes were open. Their mouths moved in perfect rhythm. And from somewhere above, in the beams of the high ceiling, a whisper came, not from one, but all. Memory must be emptied to make room for grace. Leora turned to run, but saw Cressida standing behind her, head tilted, bleeding from her ears. She smiled. You'll learn to stand soon, too. Episode 4. The Third Door. There are only 2 locked doors at St. Arabelle's. Everyone knows that. One seals the chapel. The other, the relic archives. But on the night Maris disappeared, a third door appeared. No knob, no hinges, only a crack, leaking the sound of children praying. It happened during morning mass. The benches were cold. The girls sat still as they were taught. No eye contact, no questions, only mouths moving with empty syllables. Leora sat between Cressida and Maris. The new girl, Maris, had started twitching during the final hymn. At first, it seemed like a hiccup in rhythm. Then her body jerked sideways, arms stiff, lips still praying, but eyes wide with something not holy. Then she stood and walked out of the pews, down the aisle, right through the chapel doors, which didn't open. They bent like fabric. No one followed. No one spoke. And when Mass ended, Sister Marin simply said, "She has been taken into silence." That night, Leora couldn't sleep. Her skin itched. Her mark bled again. She walked the east wing out of instinct. That's when she saw it, between the linen closet and the staircase. A third door, not built, not carved, just there, flush with the wall, colorless, breathing. She placed her hand on it. It was warm and wet. A voice murmured from inside, She's here now, but not all of her. Leora backed away, but the door pulled, not open, inward, just enough to reveal the narrowest crack. And through it, a room of girls, dozens, all standing, all silent, all wearing veils of red gauze. At the far end, a mirror, and inside the mirror, Leora saw herself, not her now, a younger version, smiling, whispering, "I told him I wouldn't forget you." Then everything went black. Leora woke in her bed. Morning sun, bird song, but her slippers were wet. And on her hand, beneath the bleeding mark, a second symbol had appeared, a circle, not drawn, branded. When she asked Sister Marin about Maris, the nun simply said, "There is no student by that name. You must be remembering something that never was." But that night in the mirror, Maris looked back and whispered, "The third door never opens. It only takes." Episode 5, The Girl in the Baptismal Font. The chapel has no clocks, but everyone wakes at 3 a.m., some to pray, some to forget, and one to drown herself again and again, so she won't be remembered. Leora heard the dripping first, a steady rhythm like a broken hymn. Drip, drip, drip. It came from the chapel. The doors were supposed to be sealed at night, but tonight they were open, just a sliver, like someone had forgotten to lock the forgetting. Inside, everything was dark, but the air was wet, not mist, humidity with memory. Leora followed the sound to the altar, but the candles wouldn't light. Even her breath came out cold. The sound led her further, behind the pulpit, down 3 cracked marble steps, to the baptismal font. It was not empty. A girl knelt in the basin, her body folded forward, submerged to the chin in milky water. Her lips moved, but there were no words, only bubbles and blood, tiny threads of red leaking from her mouth as if the prayer had been too long. Leora froze. She stepped closer. The girl's face turned slightly, eyes open underwater. Not afraid, not dead, just committed. Her arms were scarred with verses, not carved, branded. Leora read one, "She who forgets becomes holy." Another, "She who remembers must drown again." Leora reached out, touched the water. It burned, not with heat, with recognition. She remembered this girl, not by name, but by absence. This was Alice, 2 beds over, the girl who vanished before Leora's own first sacrament. Everyone had said there was never an Alice, but here she was, baptizing herself into silence. Suddenly, the girl sat up. Water cascaded down her body. She looked at Leora and whispered, "Don't take your memory back. It bites." Leora stumbled backward, slipped. Her hand grazed the edge of the font, and something slid beneath her skin. A mark, not hers, an X inside a circle. It pulsed once, then vanished. The girl submerged again, peaceful, like a prayer that refused to end. And the water began to glow, as if remembering. The first girl, who ever forgot too much. Episode 6, The Diary of St. Arabelle. The beds at St. Arabelle's are all the same, but only one has a heartbeat sewn into the mattress. And when Leora rips it open, what spills out isn't stuffing, but scripture. She found it while trying to sleep, a soft thumping beneath her spine. At first, she thought it was her own heartbeat, but it pulsed off rhythm. It answered her. Leora cut open the underside of the mattress with a pair of embroidery scissors. What spilled out was not cotton. It was parchment, folded tight, stained with wax, and stitched closed with blonde hair. She unfurled it beneath candlelight and read the first line. This is not a diary. It is the undoing of a miracle. The pages were brittle but alive. They pulsed as she turned them. Inside, she found confessions, but not from students. From the first girl, the girl whose name was carved above the chapel entrance. Arabelle. She was 13, devout, chosen. The priest said she was filled with divine light, but she wrote, "It is not light, it is heat. It burns me when I remember who I am." They made her the first sacrament, the first vessel, the first to forget the world in order to hold the divine. But Arabelle never forgot. She faked it. Every day, every mass. She wrote, I mouthed the prayers they gave me, but I still hear my mother's voice when I sleep. And then, the line that stopped Leora's breath. If anyone finds this, know, Sister Marin was not always a nun. She was my confessor, and she fed me to the altar. Leora's candle flickered out. A breeze, but the windows were sealed. From under the floor, a hum, like the sound of girls praying beneath stone. She flipped to the last page. Nothing, just a faint burn mark in the center. But when her blood from the baptismal mark touched it, words appeared. You are not her first echo. You are her continuation. Leora stumbled back, suddenly remembering her first night at St. Arabelle's. The way the walls hummed when she cried. The way the chapel doors breathed when she passed. And that name Sister Marin whispered during her sacrament. Welcome home, Arabelle. Leora isn't just a student. She's the memory they couldn't erase. Reborn, rewritten, returned. Episode 7. Confession without a priest. The confession booths at St. Arabelle's are empty now. No incense, no priests, just mirrors and silence and the voices of the girls speaking back. It started with a whisper behind the glass. Leora had been brushing her teeth, leaning too close to the mirror, when the steam cleared and her own reflection didn't move. She blinked. Her reflection didn't. And then it spoke. Tell me what you remember. That same day, she noticed the other girls lining up silently outside the lavatory, not to wash, but to stare into the mirrors. One by one, they entered, closed the door, spoke softly. And when they came out, their eyes were red, not from crying, from something else, like something had looked back too long. At lunch, no one spoke, except Cressida, who finally turned to Leora and said, They're listening now. It's safer than the chapel. That night, Leora returned a mirror, the same one. She pressed her palm against the glass. It was colder than it should be. She whispered, What are you? And her reflection smiled, not cruelly, almost tenderly. You. She opened the diary of Arabelle again, flipped to the final pages. There, in frantic ink, they've taken the booths away. No more priests, no more absolution, only reflection, only replication. Leora tried to stop the other girls, tried to say, this isn't confession, but they just smiled at her. One whispered, We're not confessing to be forgiven, we're confessing to be remembered. That night, she returned to the chapel, found the confession booths empty, dust covered. One had a broken door. Inside, a single shard of mirror, bloody, still warm, written above the seat, carved into the wood. The last priest forgot too much. And in the corridor outside, mirrors lined the wall, all facing inward, all dark, until she passed them. Then, each one flickered to life. And in each reflection, not her, but versions of her, slightly younger, slightly older, eyes open in different ways, mouths moving silently, and from them all the same message. Confess to us before we confess for you. Episode 8, The Bloodlit Mass. Mass was always held at dawn, but this one began at midnight. No bells, no hymns, only footsteps in ash, and veins that glowed in the dark. Leora didn't mean to follow them. She woke to the sound of cloth dragging across stone, a rhythm, like robes moving in unison. She rose barefoot. The floor was warm, pulsing beneath her. The hallway was empty, but still she followed. Down the east corridor, past the locked library, past the chapel, to the crypt below the chapel. That wasn't on any map. But tonight, the door was open. Inside, darkness. Not absence of light, a refusal of it. Yet somehow she could see. Dozens of girls stood in rows, heads bowed, robes stitched with thorns, candles in their hands. But none were lit. Instead, each girl had a vein exposed across the wrist, glowing softly red. The room was lit by blood. Cressida stood at the altar, but it wasn't Cressida. Her eyes were closed. Her lips moved too fast to be prayer. And the mark on her palm, red triangle pointed down, had spread up her entire arm. She opened her mouth and spoke with two voices. One was hers. The other was older, deeper. This is not a mass of worship. This is a mass of remembering. She pointed to Leora. The room turned. Every girl whispered. She still has her name. Leora tried to run, but the walls rippled like flesh. She collapsed to her knees. The stone beneath her cracked, revealing a sigil carved beneath the dust. A name, hers, but written backward and spelled with nails. Cressida approached, placed her hand on Leora's head, and whispered, "You must bleed it out, or it will consume you." Suddenly, the room filled with light, but not from candles, from the girls themselves. Every vein glowed bright, pulsing together. The air filled with a low hum, not from their mouths, but from the floor, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Leora screamed, and her palm split open. Blood poured down her wrist, but not red, gold. The mass ended. No blessing, no amen, only silence, and the sound of her blood sizzling on stone. When she looked up, she was alone. The girls were gone, the crypt sealed, but on her hand, a new mark had appeared. A single word, witness. Episode 9, the teeth beneath the cross. They said the altar held holy relics, a vial of saint's blood, a splinter of the true cross, but they never said what was beneath it, because it still had a mouth, and it was still chewing. After the mass, Leora couldn't feel her name anymore. It had started to slip, like a thread pulled loose from a tapestry. Every time someone spoke to her, there was a pause, as if their tongues had to reach for her identity. She stopped correcting them, because part of her wondered if they were right. Maybe she really wasn't Leora anymore. Maybe she was just next. The chapel felt different now, too quiet, like it was listening harder than before. That night, she returned, alone, not because she was curious, but because her veins had started to burn again. And the burn always pointed toward the altar. She lit no candles. She didn't kneel. She walked straight to the front, climbed onto the altar itself, and knocked once, twice, and the stone hollowed back. She pried the marble slab open. Dust flew, but beneath it, no gold, no books, no bones of saints. Only a mouth, set into the stone, gums shriveled, teeth intact, still chewing, slow, deliberate, tireless. It wore a rosary like a gag, blackened pearls. Silver cross melted halfway, and when she leaned closer, it spoke, without voice, without sound, only through her own heartbeat. "You fed me once, and you will feed me again." Leora stumbled back, but the mouth did not stop. It chewed like a habit, like worship, like memory. She dropped to her knees, trembling, then saw it, a name carved just beneath the lips. Not hers, Sister Marin, but crossed out, below it in fresher lines. Leora. The teeth began to move faster, as if excited or hungry. Suddenly, the candles in the chapel lit themselves, with no flame, just blood, each wick soaked in crimson, burning like veins, and from the pews behind her, a sound, breathing, slow, in unison, the other girls. But they didn't speak. They stood still, heads bowed, hands over their mouths, eyes bleeding. And Leora knew she had been offered, not remembered, not chosen, replaced. She screamed, and the mouth below whispered. Names rot slowly, but yours has flavor. Episode 10, the Sacrament of Remembering. They taught her how to forget. They trained her to kneel in silence. But no one ever warned her that remembering is a ritual too. The diary of St. Arabelle had no final page. But that night, Leora found it anyway. Not in parchment, not in ink, but in voice. A voice only she could hear, carried through blood and floorboards. It spoke as she lay trembling, back in her dormitory bed. You want your name back? Then give me someone else's. She sat up, breathless. The Bible in her drawer had bloated overnight, its pages wrinkled, swollen with moisture that hadn't come from rain. She opened it. One line had burned through the paper. To unforget, you must offer memory, speak the name of another, and let the house decide who stays. She didn't know what to do until she saw Cressida at breakfast, staring blankly, mouth slightly open, like her prayers had been paused halfway. She wasn't Cressida anymore. She was drifting, a shell, but still breathing, still offered. That night, Leora walked to the chapel alone. This time, no fear, only clarity. She placed the Bible on the altar, cut her palm again, let the blood spill across the open pages. The candles did not light. The mouth beneath the altar did not move, but the walls began to whisper, dozens of voices, all Leora's, each one from a different year, a different age, and each one asked, "Whose name will you give?" Leora whispered, "Cressida." The room sighed, like lungs collapsing. The altar split open. Inside, two shapes, two girls. Both were her, one smiling, one weeping, but only one with eyes. And both reached for her hand. Only one of you remembers. Only one of you can stay. She closed her eyes and chose. The shape that remained stood tall, her back straight, her eyes bright. She looked into the dark and whispered, "My name is Leora." The chapel trembled, and outside the stained glass, the sun rose for the first time in weeks. But in the dormitory, Cressida did not wake. Only her body remained, and on her forehead, red triangle pointed down plus, a new mark, the cross of erasure. Leora cried for the first time in days, not for what she lost, but for what she stole. Episode 11, Mother Adira's tongue. Every great silence is built on a scream that was never heard. Mother Adira hadn't spoken in 42 years, not because she couldn't, but because if she did, something else would speak with her. Leora found the photo by accident, tucked inside the back cover of the school's hymn book. Old, sepia, frayed at the edges. It showed a young nun kneeling at the altar, eyes closed, mouth sewn shut. Below it, in fading ink, initiation of Adira, mouth sealed, tongue preserved. For the day remembering begins. That night, thunder cracked across the chapel roof. The girls stirred in their beds. Leora didn't sleep. She felt something in the walls. A stirring, a loosening. The house had always whispered, but tonight it listened. She followed the pull down the west wing, to Mother Adira's quarters, a place none of them had entered, a door no one dared knock. Tonight it was ajar. Inside, candles already lit, books already opened, and in the center of the room, Adira, sitting upright, hands folded, eyes blank, but bleeding. She looked at Leora. No expression, no voice, but her mouth was moving, sewn tight, but bulging beneath the stitches, as if something inside was shifting, trying to get out. And then, one thread snapped, then another, until the seams unraveled with a wet pop. Her jaw cracked open, not from age, from containment. And what came out wasn't a voice. It was a tongue, too long, too dark, too alive. It uncoiled across her lap like a serpent and began to speak, but not in her voice. It was male, ancient, holy and heretical. The altar was never meant for prayer. It was built to hold memory in flesh. Leora backed away, but the tongue slithered across the floor, stopped at her feet, and hissed, "You are the first girl to remember without dying. You are the last vessel we need." Mother Adira wept, not from pain, from release. She whispered through cracked lips, "I was 13. I remember my brother's name. They took my tongue so I wouldn't speak it again." She turned her eyes to Leora, begging, "Don't become their cathedral." Suddenly, the candles extinguished. The tongue recoiled, vanished into Adira's throat, and her mouth stitched itself closed, one thread at a time. as if the moment had passed, and the house had decided. Not yet. Leora fled, but her ears still rang with the final word the tongue spoke before slipping away. Throne. Episode 12. The Book of Uncanonized Saints. The Church has saints. Saint Arabelle's has something else. Not martyrs, not miracles, but girls who remembered too much and were turned into scripture. It began with a blood trail, not a smear, not a drop, a line, deliberate, steady, leading from the chapel steps down to a locked cabinet behind the altar. Leora followed it without thinking, because her name had started bleeding from her mouth in dreams, and she knew, somewhere, the house was already writing her down. The cabinet was iron, marked with the sigil from a mass. Red triangle pointed down, inside a circle of thorns. It opened at her touch. Inside were books, dozens, each one wrapped in leather, but not animal. The skin was too thin, too pale, still warm. She opened the first. The pages resisted at first, sticking together with old blood, but they yielded to her hand. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and on the first page, her name was isolde. She remembered the color of her sister's hair. Each page was a life. Each chapter, a prayer forgotten. Each ending, uncanonized, preserved, because canonization would make them public, and these girls were meant to be kept, held, studied, feared. Leora read for hours. Her hands trembled. Her blood dripped onto the parchment, and the book drank it in, welcomed it. The ink shifted, and new words appeared. Leora remembered the name her mother whispered before the sacrament. She dropped the book. It laughed, softly, from the spine. You were always going to end here. She backed away. But behind her, the other books began to open. Pages fluttered like wings. And from within, voices, girls, dozens, hundreds, not screaming, not begging, reading. She remembered too soon. She knelt too shallow. She doubted the ash. And then, all at once, she is one of us now. A final book slid forward, larger, older, untouched. She opened it, blank, except for a title etched in gold, The Final Vessel. Underneath, to be completed in flesh. She heard footsteps, the girls from the mass, robes whispering behind her. Cressida stood in front, smiling, holding a needle and thread. Leora clutched the blank book to her chest, screamed, I remember everything. And the books, all of them, shut at once. Dust flew, the girls disappeared, and the cabinet door slammed shut, sealing her out, or sealing something else in. But the blank book remained, still in her arms, still beating. And on the first page, one word had appeared, written in her own blood. Resist. Episode 13, The Altar Opens. The house has written everything it needed. Every silence, every stolen name, every girl who knelt too long. Now it only needs one thing left to finish its gospel. A final breath, a final page, a final witness, willing to burn. The book would not let go. Even when Leora slept, it pulsed against her chest like a second heart. She stopped bleeding, but the book kept drinking. By dawn, her name was carved across every wall of the dormitory, some forward, some backward, some spelled in bone dust. She didn't ask who did it, because she already knew. The girls no longer blinked when she passed. They bowed. They whispered, Final Vessel, Holy Memory, the one who stayed full. On the 13th night, the chapel sang. No voices, no choir. The wood sang. The walls hummed, and the altar split. This time it didn't crack. It opened, like a mouth, like a gate, like something had been holding it shut for centuries, and finally let go. Leora stepped forward. She was barefoot. The stones beneath her feet were hot, breathing. The book opened in her hands. Its pages turned on their own, one by one, until the final one, blank, still waiting. Sister Marin stood near the front pew, eyes closed, mouth open, and from her throat, the voice of Arabelle. It ends in flesh. It ends in fire. It ends when a memory burns louder than a lie. The altar's mouth widened. Inside, a throne of teeth, a pulpit made of stitched tongues, and at the center, a girl wrapped in red veils, face half burned. But Leora recognized her, because it was every girl who had come before her. Arabelle, Isolde, Cressida, Alice, Leora, all inside one body, waiting to be written into fire. The book began to shake. Words bled across the page. It asked, name or flame? Scripture or silence? Leora held the book high, looked at the girls around her, some weeping, some kneeling, some smiling as if finally free. She whispered, none of us were vessels. We were volumes, and we are done being read. She dropped the book into the altar. It caught flame. The pages screamed. The chapel cracked, and from below, the house howled. Fire rose. Candles exploded. Mirrors shattered, and the voices inside the stone. Forgotten saints, stolen children, rewoven prayers, all cried in relief. When it was done, Leora stood alone, ash at her feet, dust in her lungs. The altar gone, the chapel quiet, and the book, now black in leather, empty. She walked outside. The fog had lifted. For the first time, she could see the edge of the forest. She didn't turn back, but as she stepped beyond the threshold of St. Arabelle's, she heard a voice in the wind. What is your name? And she smiled, whispered, mine.